Ben. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lorie Ames. I work at Western New York Crop Management as a junior crop consultant. I've been here for about 8 years, and I'm going to introduce this next segment. Before we begin going on, I want to remind you that our webinar is being recorded. Everyone is muted except for presenters. If there are any questions, please be typing them in the chat box. We have a few presenters within this next hour and a half. All the presenters will be presenting before we answer any questions. So feel free to type in questions while they are presenting, and we will address them at the end of the segment. Also, if you're earning pesticide credits, it's very important that you remember to sign out at the end of this presentation and the meeting to get your pesticide credits. So make sure you put your full name, your farm name, and your pesticide ID in there. So going on to introduce the next segment, I wanted to make you aware of what's going to be happening during this time period. We will begin with Aaron Ristow. He's going to show a video that we put on a cover crop trial we did at Swede Farm in Pavilion, New York. After that, I will discuss the experiment, and then Joseph Amsili will be showing a video of what he did at the lab. He washed the cover crops plants and roots, and he did some measurements on that depth of that. And then Rod Porter will be talking about new cover crop species this season and other cover crop news. And then Jay Swede will be talking about biostrip tilling that he's done on the same field that we did a plot in. And then wrapping up the session, Aaron Ristow will be talking more about the American Farmland Trust. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Aaron Ristow.
Thanks, Lorie. My name is Aaron Ristow. I'm the Ag Stewardship Program Coordinator for American Farmland Trust, and we focus heavily on Western New York right now, specifically the Genesee River watershed, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. But really, I shouldn't be introducing this because Lorie and Jay Swede and Rod Porter and Joseph put a lot of work into setting up these cover crop trials. Jay's farm is part of a demonstration farm network. Lorie has been part of a program that we have for training soil health specialists across the state, and she's done a wonderful job there, and this is part of that program, some outreach for this. And so we worked all together to set up these trials, but I think the rest of it is self-explanatory. And of course, Lorie and Rod and Jay will be available to take questions after, and Joseph. So I think that the video is going to be shared from the mothership. So hopefully that can happen.
All right, here we go.
Maybe if you could do full screen. Yep, there we go. So we should pause the video. You have to do, there's a setting in Zoom for specific that you have to change to make the audio happen. And I'm not exactly sure what that is. It might be in there, the view options. Maybe Joseph.
Sweet corn,
there we go.
peas, string beans.
It's working now. Maybe you could rewind it to the beginning and then.
Oh, my name is Jay Swede. We farm here in kind of the corner of Livingston, Wyoming, in Genesee County. We grow corn, soybeans, wheat, along with some processing vegetables, sweet corn, peas, string beans. There's a few of the canning crops that we grow for the frozen market. We're on one of our farms here. We have some of our cover crops that we normally do. If you can see out behind me, we have what we call like a bio-tillage strip, where we have tillage radishes and oats alternating on 30-inch rows. And when we come in the spring, we're going to try to plant corn over top of where the tillage radishes are. We like the tillage radishes to suck up some of the nutrients that are left over from the previous crop, which was sweet corn, followed by manure. And then we like to have the oats get big enough that they winter kill and then lay down between the row and give us some kind of mulch between the rows in the spring. That's what we're doing on this field anyway. And then we have some other ones where we do just some mixes of oats and rye or other types of cover crops, a little bit of trying a few different things here and there. We tried some other mixes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lorie Ames. I'm from Western New York Crop Management. We're here at a cover crop trial that was originated through our American Farmland Trust Soil Health Specialist meeting. One of our last meetings, I was talking with Joseph, and we discussed the second workshop that they did, the tubes they brought in for a lab demonstration that showed root depth. And we thought it would be a really neat idea to do that in an actual field and compare it to lab root depth. So Jay graciously volunteered this field for us to use so we could see in real life what roots do in the actual field versus in the lab conditions. We're taking soil from this field, we're taking weather conditions, and we're seeing what happens. So this is a result of how that came about.
Good morning. I'm Rod Porter with King's Agri-Seed. I'm out here in Swede's field where we've planted some cover crop demonstration plots. Lorie Ames organized all of this, and I helped provide some seed and helped her plant. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different things that we planted here. First of all, we planted a number of different species to get ideas of how different species react, what they will produce as far as biomass, what they do for the soil, how easily we can plant into them in the spring. So we have a variety of different things. The idea was to get different ideas on how different things work in this situation and perhaps give you ideas of what could work on your farm in your situation. So the first plot we have here is called, it's a variety called Keystone. It's a winter pea. So this is a pea that you would plant in the fall, get it established, and will survive the winter. It's related to Austrian winter peas. This is a variety that's bred for better winter hardiness. Austrian winter peas sometimes will survive, sometimes don't. This should be much better. Oftentimes we would probably recommend this in some sort of a mix, but so it's a pea. It will fix nitrogen, and it will grow in the spring. So we'll move along. The next plot is called Kazakh black oats, or sometimes it's referred to as a winter oat. If you compare it to the plot right behind me, this is a traditional spring oat behind me. You can see that it has much more growth this fall compared to the black oat, but the black oat will grow longer into the cool season and may actually survive the winter. Depends a little bit on how harsh our winter is, but may actually survive the winter and grow in the spring as well. So we're just comparing these two different oats. We'll see how the root systems look and what happens in the spring. Of course, the spring oat will be dead. This black oat may be alive and growing still. Okay, we've moved out of the oat plots into some winter grain plots. So I'm standing right between winter triticale to my right and winter rye to my left. Two very good grains. Winter triticale is often used as a forage on dairy farms here in New York, but makes an excellent cover crop as well. Triticale will tend to be a little bit leafier, not quite as fast growing in the spring as rye. Tends to also provide a little bit better ground cover, although we have good ground cover with both here today. So winter triticale and cereal rye, both very good overwintering cereals for cover crop. So moving into one of the mixtures that we put together here at King's, as you're viewing this, you probably are looking at and seeing mostly radish, even though radish is a fairly minor component of the mix. This it's called broadcaster mix, a heavy component of ryegrass with 3 different kinds of clover and tillage radish. So you can see how easily the tillage radish can dominate, but there is a good establishment of the ryegrass and some clovers underneath. So again, the radish will die, but some of the other components, the ryegrass and the clover, should survive and be here in the spring. This mix has worked really good for us at King's. Now I'm standing in between 2 different types of ryegrass. They're both annual ryegrasses. To my right is a standard annual ryegrass. To my left is a ryegrass called lowboy. Lowboy is more of like a turf type of a ryegrass. And the idea of this variety is that it has a really aggressive root system with a slow growth on the top. The problem with annual ryegrass is it can be somewhat hard to control in the spring. It's got a waxy surface to the leaf. It gets fairly dense and can be a little bit hard to kill. The idea with the lowboy is that it'd be easier to plant into and easier to kill. So we're comparing these 2 different kinds of ryegrass. Next, we have one of our Terra Life cover crop mixes called Regal DT. This is a very diverse mix designed for compaction relief and building soil microbes and tilth. So this mix contains a variety of things, including the black oat, the tillage radish, buckwheat, sunflower. You might notice this kind of reddish purplish plant is called Abscisian cabbage. That's designed for good root penetration. So and a couple different kinds of clover, as well as flax. If you see the sort of spindly narrow leaf plant, that's flax. So very diverse mix. This will winter kill. Then we're in a mix called Maize Pro. This mix was designed specifically for planting ahead of corn. So this has a variety of things in it as well. You can see quite a bit different than the other mix. It contains winter rye, vetch, field peas, crimson clover, flax, a couple other kinds of clover, tillage radish, and even a little bit of sorghum, which is dead now from frost. So pretty diverse mix. Some of this mix will winter kill, some of it will survive. So another diverse mix. Then we just have straight hairy vetch. Vetch is a pretty vigorous growing legume. It's a winter annual legume. So we get it established in the fall. It will grow in the spring. It can produce a lot of nitrogen. However, its maximum nitrogen would be at bloom. And oftentimes we're not going to let it go that far because we want to plant our corn prior to full bloom, which would usually be like end of May. Next, another legume is crimson clover. Crimson clover is a fast-growing clover. You can see we have it established here this fall. We usually like to plant it with something else as a companion just to give it some protection over the winter. It does have a little tenderness, so in a harsh winter may not survive. But most of the time here in New York we get good survival, and this will also produce nitrogen for a future crop. And then we just have a straight plot of the daikon radish or tillage radish. Many people understand this and have heard about it over the years, but very good for deep root penetration and compaction relief, as well as scavenging and recycling nutrients that are left in the field in the fall.
thank you for that video display. So going further on into this, why do an experiment like this? It seems that a lot of cover cropping over the past couple of years, we've really dwelt a lot on the above ground growth and not too much on what happens underneath. So it seemed like a good idea to demonstrate what's going on underneath, especially in an actual field with actual weather conditions and the soils being used in that field. So we decided that on August 31st, that Rod Porter, Mike Weedrich, and myself were going to plant this plot. Jay Swede donated a segment of his field for us to do this demonstration in the pavilion area. And Rod Porter donated about 13 varieties of seed mixes and regular seed for the trial. Our seeds included single species and mixed species, as you saw in our video, and the varieties were carefully selected by Dave DeGoyer, Joseph Amsili, Rod Porter, and myself to incorporate a variety of different situations. These differences will be discussed further in Joseph's video. Mike Weedrich drove the planter for us as Rod and I filled the seed boxes. We flagged out different varieties and we determined where to place the tubes. Joseph was helpful in determining what to select for the tubes that we should use. We wanted them to match the tubes that were being used in the lab because we're comparing ideal situations in a lab versus our field conditions. So we therefore determined that the PVC Schedule 40 plastic piping was the best choice, and that we cut these into 2.5-foot sections, which were provided by the New York NRCS through some grant money. And Joseph provided us some lined plastic bags that we inserted in these tubes for easy removal after the growing period had finished. We filled the tubes with the soil from the field, which was an Appleton soil mix. We then planted 3 seeds per tube, and for the single species, and for the mixed species, we did about 2 seeds per mixed species in there. I added water on the first day, and then after that, it was all watered by nature. One of the factors we weren't able to replicate from the field was the ground compaction. We had tried to force the tubes into the ground and they were starting to break. So we had to resort to filling them. So that's something we weren't able to observe in this experiment. Rod helped me dig 1.5-foot holes and we put the tubes in with the soil. I returned to the plot weekly on Tuesdays for about 8 weeks. We did some measurements such as rainfall, growth in inches above ground in the plant in the tubes, as well as growth above ground in the inches of the plants in the field. The plot received a total rainfall of 2.2 inches during that 8 weeks. Aaron Ristow, Jay Swede, Rod Porter, and myself harvested the tubes on October 13th. Aaron delivered the tubes to Joseph at the Cornell lab, and Aaron and Joseph carefully washed the roots and developed the video you'll be seeing next of what they found. So what's next? We are going to be returning to the plot in April and pull out one last tube. We were able to have a replicated tube, and therefore we wanted to see what happens when we overwinter that. So we'll show you a result from that as well. I want to do a special thank you for everyone that was involved in this project, for Aaron Ristow for mentoring me through the process and helping to find ways to make this experiment run smoothly, for the New York NRCS for providing funding for the tubes, for Joseph Amsili for his expertise and guidance on how to carry out the experiment, as well as his hard work in the lab, getting the pictures you'll be seeing. Stephanie Castle was great at filming our cover crop trial video. Dave DeGoyer and Mike Younger were very helpful in helping me brainstorm ideas and with the planning process as well. Rod Porter, very grateful for the seed and the labor that you helped put into the plot, as well as educating us on the various mixes we were growing. Jay Swede for the donation of his section of the field on his farm for us to plant this plot. All the staff at Western New York Crop Management for their support and input of ideas. And last but not least, Avery and Jason for the technical support during all of this. So I will introduce our next speaker, Joe Amsili.
Thanks so much, Lorie. It's great to be here. Let me get my presentation. Sure, first we're gonna show the video. So, and then next we're gonna do kind of comparing cover crop roots grown in the field and the greenhouse. I did a greenhouse trial in 2019 and then another one in 2020. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll do my best to try to make some comparisons. But first, let's watch a video which is similar, I guess, to the first video, but we grew those same species in potting soil in the greenhouse. And so, yeah, definitely the field comparison is really useful. And let's cue the video. All right, so you should be able to see this, and if you don't, give me a holler.
What's the best cover crop for nitrogen fixation, for adding organic matter, for breaking up soil compaction, for suppressing weeds, for increasing water infiltration? Is there a cover crop that performs all these functions? And how will it fit into my crop rotation? In this video, we'll be looking at the characteristics of these 16 cover crop species behind me to understand their benefits and drawbacks for specific services. For the last 2 months, these cover crops have been grown in the greenhouse in 4-inch diameter PVC tubes that are about 2.5 feet long. And although these cover crops were grown in potting soil, which is a much easier medium for roots to grow through compared to field soil, we'll gain some useful insights by comparing the root systems of these different cover crop species. The species we've grown come from the grass, legume, brassica, and a few other less represented plant families. Some of these species are winter annuals and some are summer annuals. While some are winter hardy in New York State, while others are not. The amount of benefits we get from the cover crop species in this video depend on how long the cover crop is allowed to grow and the amount of biomass it can produce. Let's start with the grasses. We grew 6 annual grass cover crop species: cereal rye, triticale, annual ryegrass, oats, sorghum Sudan grass, and pearl millet. Grass cover crops tend to have robust root systems below ground that support the following services. They are great end scavengers, weed suppressors, great for building soil organic matter, keeping the soil in place, and are the best hosts for mycorrhizal fungi. Let's start with the most widely planted winter annual grass cover crop in the United States, cereal rye. Cereal rye is a winter annual cover crop, also known as a cool season grass, which means this cover crop is planted in fall and terminated in spring because this cover crop is winter hardy. Cereal rye is the most reliable cover crop to get in late. If you miss windows for other winter annuals, there is always cereal rye. Therefore, it's sometimes the only option for planting a cover crop in October or later. It's a great end scavenger, weed suppressor, and a great cover crop for adding lots of organic matter to the soil. Cereal rye is good at performing these services, partially because it can produce a lot of root biomass. Next, we have triticale, which is another winter annual grass that is winter hardy. It's a cross between cereal rye and winter wheat. It's been shown to have similar traits as cereal rye, but is a little bit less aggressive. In a recent study comparing root systems of cover crop species, we found that triticale produced much more root biomass in the between row space than crimson clover and canola. The ability of grass roots to produce more roots in the between row space may be an important way that these grasses are adept at scavenging nitrogen and competing with weeds. Oats are another cool season grass that can be planted in fall or spring, but this one is not winter hardy in New York. Planting date is August through September in fall, or mid-April to mid-May in spring. As above, oats are capable of producing a lot of root biomass. Annual ryegrass is another cool season grass that can be planted anytime from April to September. In fall, an ideal planting time is mid-August. Annual ryegrass is winter hardy, and there is some concern it will go to seed and become a weed. Annual ryegrass is a good candidate for being interseeded in corn, and many vegetable farmers use it in between vegetable beds. Annual ryegrass is known for its extensive shallow root system, as you can see here. Therefore, this cover crop can be one of the best options for rebuilding soil aggregates. The last two grasses are summer annual grasses, or warm season grasses, meaning they need to be planted in the summer. Like corn, sorghum, Sudan grass, and pearl millet photosynthesize a little bit differently than the grasses mentioned above, and are adapted to grow at high light intensities, higher temperatures, and drier growing conditions. They are not winter hardy. These cover crops pretend to produce high carbon and nitrogen ratios and lots of organic matter inputs. Sorghum Sudan grass is a cross between forage-type sorghum and Sudan grass. Has a planting date from July 1st through mid-August. It's a heat-loving grass, grows fast, and is great at suppressing weeds, and is more drought-tolerant than corn. Sorghum Sudan grass is unrivaled for adding organic matter to soils, because sorghum Sudan grass produces a very large amount of above-ground and below-ground biomass. Sorghum Sudan grass specifically produces a lot of adventitious roots, which are these thicker diameter roots. Sorghum Sudan grass's large root system and large amount of these thicker diameter roots make it a great candidate to break up subsoil compaction. Pearl millet is another summer annual cover crop that is adapted to deal with heat and drought. Matt Ryan and his team are looking at some of these alternative summer forages that can have a slightly shorter season and be more drought tolerant. Here we have pearl millet on the right and sorghum Sudan grass on the left for contrast. Interestingly, although the above ground biomass looks very similar between these two species, the root systems are very different. Pearl millet doesn't produce a lot of these thick adventitious roots that we saw in sorghum Sudan grass, and as a result, it is probably not as good at breaking up compaction as sorghum Sudan grass. Next, we have the legume cover crops. We grew 6 legume species: red clover, crimson clover, hairy vetch, Austrian winter pea, cow pea, and sun hemp. Cover crops in the legume family are the only cover crops capable of fixing atmospheric nitrogen into their tissues, so their growth is not limited by soil nitrogen. As a result, legumes tend to have the lowest carbon to nitrogen ratios and highest concentrations of nitrogen in their tissues, and are therefore the best cover crops for increasing nitrogen fertility for the following cash crop. But the high tissue nitrogen concentrations of legumes make them poor candidates for reducing nitrogen leaching. Red clover is a workhorse of the Northeast. It's a biennial to wheat perennial, so you can probably only get 3 years out of it. Frost seeding is a common strategy to establish this cover crop in February or March. Red clover can also be planted through September. Red clover has a slower fall growth than crimson clover, which has more of an annual habit. Therefore, this slow-growing cover crop benefits from a nurse crop. Frost seeding into winter wheat is a perfect synergy. Red clover is an excellent nitrogen fixer. Crimson clover is the most widely planted winter annual legume in the United States. But since it's not reliably winter hardy in New York, it's not so common here. Crimson clover is an annual and it has fast fall growth, but it doesn't have as much nitrogen fixation and root production as either hairy vetch or red clover. Plant by September 1st. Hairy vetch is the best choice for a winter hardy annual legume in New York State, and it's been found to be one of the best nitrogen fixers amongst the legumes. It's slow to establish and also likes to climb with its viney architecture, so it's often planted with a nurse crop, such as oats. Some organic wheat growers aren't interested in hairy vetch because some of its seed that's planted doesn't germinate right away, which is termed hard seed. Additionally, hairy vetch seed is very similar in weight to wheat seed, so it's extremely difficult to sort. Austrian winter pea is another winter annual legume that is not reliably winter hardy. It's a great candidate to be planted on organic operations because winter will provide the cover crop termination. Field peas, which are similar, can be planted in spring and are often mixed with oats. Cowpea, also known as black-eyed peas, is not actually a true pea, but rather a bean. It's a summer annual and drought tolerant. Although cowpea is a large seeded crop, research has indicated that it may be a poor weed suppressor in the Northeast due to slow growth rates. It's much more common in the southern states and can have a deep taproot. Sun hemp is a fast-growing, drought-tolerant summer tropical legume that needs heat, has a planting date from mid-June through mid-July, and is able to produce substantial biomass and able to kill some soil-borne diseases and nematodes. Its seed has become much more available recently. Next, we grew 3 species from other plant families, the most important being the brassica family. These species included forage radish, phacelia, and sunflower. Next up is forage radish, or as it's known, tillage radish. It's the most widely planted winter annual brassica cover crop in the United States, and it's not winter hardy in the Northeast. In New York, forage radish needs to be planted by early September at the latest. One thing that is unique about brassicas compared to grasses and legumes is that they are non-mycorrhizal. Mycorrhizal fungi help the plant access immobile nutrients in the soil in exchange for plant sugars. So it's thought that the very fine roots, much finer than in grasses or legume species, is an adaptation to having no mycorrhizal fungi. These very fine absorptive roots are likely why this cover crop is very responsive to high soil nitrogen and a great nitrogen scavenger. Radish offers very rapid fall growth and great weed suppression. The radish taproot increases infiltration and helps break up subsoil compaction. Radish and other brassicas have been shown to be better at breaking up subsoil compaction compared to most grasses and legumes. Radish and brassica roots are especially gravitropic, meaning that they will try to grow vertically down into the subsoil no matter the obstacle. Additionally, in contrast to grasses, brassica roots undergo secondary growth, which is the widening of the roots, which is another important way these roots break up compaction. The radish root decomposes and disappears over winter, leaving the empty holes that the radish occupied the season before. Phacelia is a lesser-known cover crop from the borage family. There are not many cover crops from this plant family. Phacelia is characterized as having a taproot and, similar to brassicas, has very fine roots, so it can also be a great candidate to scavenge nitrogen. But in the Northeast, it's found to be slow to establish and tends to grow poorly. Sunflower is in the aster family. It's characterized by having a taproot and thicker roots that are well adapted for breaking up subsoil compaction. And it's a great drought-tolerant cover crop to include in a summer cover crop mixture that will attract pollinators and build neighbor relations. Grass, legume, bicultures, and mixtures. Combining grasses and legumes is a great strategy to help us get the greatest range of services by bringing together species that have different benefits. And they are self-regulating so that when soil nitrogen is low, the legume will fix nitrogen. But if soil nitrogen is high, the legume will be less competitive and the grass will scavenge nitrogen and prevent leaching. Here we have a commonly planted biculture of oats and Austrian winter peas. The Austrian winter pea is a great nitrogen fixer, but potentially produces less above ground and below ground biomass than oats or cereal rye.
All right, so now to the rest of the presentation. Hopefully everyone heard that all right. It's hard to know with these Zoom things.
Thank you, Joe.
And here,
All right, we'll
We're good.
introduce Rod Porter next.
so we have the comparison part, the brief, it's not too long. So these were the 3 greenhouse trials that we did. One was the one that I did in 2019 that was more realistic than the one that we saw in the video, which was kind of a 50% sand, 50% soil mixture. Then we had one that I did this year, which was kind of the partner one with this Swede trial, field trial.
Joe, I hate to interrupt, but I think we can't see your screen.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Okay, let's try that again. This is fun.
That's working. Thanks.
Okay, this is, all right, let me. Okay, sorry for that. I'll get through this quick. So we have the comparing cover crop roots grown in the field and greenhouse. We had 3 trials, and it's important to note, I guess as a scientist, we would love to have these be replicated so we can make more easy conclusions from it, but this is just kind of one of each for all of these. So we had 2 greenhouse trials, one with a sand soil, which is more realistic for field conditions. We had one that we did last year, which was the partner to this Swede farm trial, which is just in potting soil. And then we had the field trial. And like Lorie said, it's really hard to study roots. So there's some trade-offs you have to make. So instead of using being able to pound them in the ground, they use repacked field soil. So probably a little bit less dense than reality. So a little bit about the trials. Yeah, the trial 1, 50% medium sand and lima silt loam. Having a lot of sand in there really helps make it easy to wash the roots. So that's kind of what I prefer to do. And then we had this greenhouse trial. We did this last year with potting soil, and these were actually fertilized much more. So we'll be able to see that difference. And obviously potting soil is the lowest possible density of the soil you can get. So you get a little bit unrealistic root growth and proliferation. But in terms of the video that we just watched, which was those plants, it's still useful for comparing species across those conditions, but it's important to compare to try to get at what the field conditions are like. So that's what Lorie and Western Crop Management and Aaron and Rod and Jay helped to do. So a little bit less time in the field than my plants, but we'll be able to see that. So the main factor is this is the obvious one that affects the growth of cover crops and the root characteristics. Obviously, if you're growing in the greenhouse, you have more light and heat than would be present for growing winter annual cover crops normally. The bulk density is important too. So in the greenhouse trials, it's probably less. My medium sand and soil, maybe was closer to the field trial than this first one, but obviously the potting soil is really unrealistic. And the biggest thing that I'll talk about with some of these pictures is just the nitrogen, the way that nitrogen limits plant growth and shapes this root response. Because plants, although different species have different characteristics, they're also very plastic, which means that they respond to the soil environment and are able to change their characteristics to take up more nitrogen or something. So this is kind of an example of that, is even a singular plant, if there's a high soil nitrogen environment and on one side of the plant and a low on the other side, the one side the plant will invest a lot of energy into producing fine roots to be able to take advantage of that increased nitrogen environment in one location than the other. So that's kind of what we saw. So although the video is really useful, it's also useful to have this comparison across species. So here on the left, we have the Swede trial. The second one was a medium soil and sand, and it's kind of just riding off the soil, the decomposition of organic matter. Both these are really. And then we had this potting soil, which is getting a bunch of nitrogen fertilizer in the watering regime that it has. And this, and if you, so what we notice here is basically, just, well, first of all, to get to Lorie's point is these under the greenhouse produce a lot more biomass than was capable under the field conditions, which has a lot to do with the nitrogen fertility, but also the greenhouse conditions. But one thing that's really interesting in comparing the individuals across these different trials is the strong effect of nitrogen availability on the root characteristics. So here you can see the crimson clover on the right, which is in that high soil nitrogen environment, producing an extreme amount of really fine absorptive roots to be able to take advantage of all that nitrogen. And we know from our studies of legumes is that when nitrogen in the soil is really high, they say, okay, we're not going to do any nitrogen fixation. We're just going to suck up nitrogen from the soil environment. Whereas in more normal, lower soil and nitrogen environments, you can get nodules. You can't see them in this picture, but there are nodules on the two pictures from the left, and they're also doing some nitrogen fixation. But over here, definitely no nitrogen fixation. It's just they're investing gangbusters in these really, really fine roots to get at the nitrogen. And you can kind of see similar things here. The crimson clover was the biggest example, but here's on the right as well as the hairy vetch, producing more of these fine, really fine roots than normal, and no legumes, although I inoculated all these, or all these were inoculated. Triticale, you can see that in the video. You saw a lot of these maybe really finer roots than would be present under the field condition, and that's the same phenomenon. And we also got in the greenhouse just a much more root production than we got in the field, and that's due to all these factors interacting. But annual ryegrass, definitely less production in the field than in the greenhouse, but it is really cool to see these species in different environments, because the species is still showing itself. Annual ryegrass produces a serious amount of surface and a lot of fine roots. It's great for building aggregate stability, but you can also see kind of in detail just the total more amount of roots and fine roots that happens. It's cool to compare across species. These were just in the 2020 field trial and the Swede trial. And I really think it's it's so cool how different radish is from grasses and legumes, and how much more fine roots it has than, which is maybe due to that arbuscular mycorrhizal story. But yeah, very fine roots, and radish is just as good as grasses, or better at scavenging nitrogen, and is really responsive to nitrogen. So in those mixtures that Rod was showing, where only a small percentage of the seeds were radish, but radish was playing a big part in the mixture, is because if there's enough nitrogen, radish is more responsive to that nitrogen than maybe the other species, and it's quick to outcompete other species. That's part of that story. So the comparisons, yeah, cover crops have different characteristics that make them good for providing different benefits. And the greenhouse trials are great for comparing species, but it's also good to try to get a baseline of what's possible in the field. And these nitrogen fertility really affects the root characteristics. So although the plants have different kind of genetic characteristics, plants are really responsive to the soil conditions. Yeah, and definitely the amount of root biomass you saw in that video, although it's a useful educational tool, is probably not realistic to what Lorie and other folks did. So that's all I have. Next, we got Rod Porter, who's a wealth of information and knows a lot about all the different cover crop cultivars, and a lot more detailed information of how they perform across the state. So up next is Rod. And I need to stop.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Yeah, it's been really fun working with Joe and Lorie and the whole group on this trial that we did. I get a chance to work with a number of growers across the state on different things, but it's fun to do a comparison in the field and working with the group. So I just have a few slides that I want to share to review part of what you've already seen. So, yeah, share screen. Okay. So I think most everybody knows, you know, the advantages of using multi-species in cover cropping versus a single species. You can just take advantage of those different type of roots, the rooting structure, legume versus grass. So for scavenging nitrogen or fixing nitrogen, also different species will react with the microbiology in the soil to help release nutrients in different ways also. So just wanted to review a couple of the mixes that we work with and some of the things that we're doing with our cover crops. So you heard in the video and saw in the plots, we had a broadcaster mix. This mix we've used quite a lot, can be used as a standalone mix. It was originally developed with the idea of interseeding. It can work very well for interseeding, but we all know that, you know, there are challenges with interseeding also. So in general, the annual ryegrass and the clovers will establish and survive pretty well under the shade, but they do need some light in particular during establishment to get established. And so key to interseeding would be seeding earlier than most of us might think we want to. So we'd like to see interseeding done in corn like at the V4 stage. So, and of course you would need to plan for that with your herbicide program and so on. So some of the mixes that we have put together, oftentimes we're appealing to people looking for forage as well as cover crop benefits, and also a desire of a lot of people to have, you know, complex multi-species mixes. So we actually developed this whole series of mixes under the Raise Crazy name. We started with this Raise Crazy summer mix, and now we've added a spring version and a fall version to that. So this one is taking advantage of summer annual species to create a lot of biomass and diversity, can be used for a forage crop as well if somebody would desire that. This is the fall version, so this would need to be planted in the early side of the fall. Has potential, could be planted after early corn silage or after a small grain crop that comes off during the summer. So some of the species in this mix would overwinter, some would winter kill. Again, diversity of species and rooting type and legume versus grass. Another one that's been pretty popular with our forage customers is this Soil Builder Plus mix, a strong base of triticale, adding some legumes to that and a little bit of the daikon radish. So both soil benefits and a forage benefit in this mix. We've partnered with a company in Germany, a company called DSV, and they have developed a line of cover crop mixes under the TerraLife brand name. In Europe, and in this case, Germany specifically, they've done a lot of work researching the benefits of different species in rotation with different cash crops. So this is one that we had in the plots and we've used quite a bit. It's called Regal DT. It's got quite a diversity of plants. And this is a winter kill mixture that could be planted after a cereal, winter cereal harvest. So mid to late summer planting and good growth into the fall and then winter kill. The TerraLife Maize Pro mix, again, was in those plots. This was designed with the specific intent of preceding a future corn crop. So they've demonstrated with trials that these species have worked to help not only improve soil structure, but increase corn yield. And this is some trial results. Over in Germany, where winter rye is a primary cover crop that we use here in the Northeast and in the US. In Europe, a primary cover crop is mustard, actually. It's cheap and it provides good cover, but it doesn't provide a whole lot of ecosystem services, really. And so you can see the difference. This Maize Pro definitely provided higher yield with corn than the standard mono species or other cover crop mixes. You also saw in the video in the plots where we had this lowboy annual ryegrass. This is something relatively new that we're working with, and we've seen some really nice benefits of it because of its slower and lesser top growth, but still aggressive root system. And like I explained in the video, provides maybe a little bit easier opportunity to plant into that. And we believe, and we've seen some positive results of easier killing of this in the spring compared to a standard ryegrass. So, and we're also using this in a couple mixes. We have one that we call Green and Low, where we mix crimson clover with this lowboy ryegrass to get a nice canopy, good root structure, and nitrogen fixation. Couple new mixes that we just came out with in the last year. We recognize that a lot of farms may have their own small grain that they want to use for cover crop. And so we developed a couple of what we call booster mixes that you could add to your own small grain to get a more complex and multi-species cover crop and get more beneficial results from that. So this is our small box booster mix, where we're putting in hairy vetch, crimson clover, berseem clover, radish, and you'll notice Timothy in there, which you might think is odd. Actually, Timothy works really well as a winter annual crop, planted in the fall, and a lot of growth in the spring. So that's our small box booster mix. And then we developed this large box booster mix. So this would get mixed right in your large box with your small grain. This is the Keystone winter pea, crimson clover, and radish. And again, that Keystone variety is a variety that was developed for better winter hardiness So we can rely on that surviving the winter better than the standard Austrian pea. Lastly, I just want to mention another mix that we've been working with recently. Many of our customers and clients are dairy farms, and they oftentimes want to take advantage of both cover crop benefits and a forage crop. So this Yield Max cocktail mix that we developed and work with is a sorghum sedan, Italian ryegrass, clover, and vetch mix. The idea behind this, again, multi-species legume for nitrogen fixation and protein and a forage. And we get a cutting of the sorghum sedan mainly during the summer. And then we can get a late fall cutting of the cool season species in there, and then survival over the winter as a cover crop. So the way this grows together and the way these species react together is going to be somewhat dependent on the weather each year. So this past year, we saw a lot of growth out of the sorghum sedan, very limited growth because of the hot, dry summer we had of the clovers and ryegrasses, but they were there and they're serving a cover crop purpose over the winter. So with that, that's just a few things I wanted to share about what we're doing. I want to thank everybody for your time. And if you have any questions, here's my contact information. With that, I will turn it over to Jay, and he's going to talk more about what he does specifically on his farm. Stop my share. Jay, I think you can take over.
Thanks, Rod. See if I can get my screen to work here. So Lorie had some, or when we did the original video, Lorie said she had some of her customers mention some interest in what we were doing with our cover crops. So she asked me if I would at least talk about it today and show what we were doing. So give me a second here and I'll get this slideshow working anyway, I hope. There we go. When I get going here, I just want to mention there's some really nice pictures. All these pictures are from our farm, but you'll be able to tell the ones that I took and the ones that I got from American Farmland Trust that were taken by Kevin Keenan. Kevin does a really nice job at taking pictures, and just like this picture here that he took. You're going to be able to tell his and mine apart when I go through. So our cover crop experience on our farm, we've always grown cover crops, and we grow a lot of vegetables, processing vegetables, when you heard that in the video. It gives us a lot of different windows for being able to put cover crops down. And so our window may start end of July, and it'll carry on through all the way through till as late as we can be putting cover crops down. But that early window gives us the ability to try some different things with these bio strip tills and some of these other strips that we're working on. But as far as what we've always done in the past, I mean, we've always grown cover crops. We grew rye for years. I mean, that was our main cover crop when I was younger, and it was before we got into strip till. It did a great job for us. But then as we kind of, if we were doing conventional tillage, it worked well. But as we got to a little bit more reduced tillage and some other things, we struggled with it. And then we started doing some oats, and then we kind of converted over into some wheat for the later season cover crops. And as time went on, they worked fairly well, but then we started doing strip tillage. And when we got into strip tillage, we had some struggles. I'm not a real patient person when it comes to planting in the spring, so we always had challenges with maybe the oats laying down and sealing the ground and not letting the ground dry out, or the wheat. When we'd go to terminate it, it wouldn't die off quick enough, and it was giving us some issues with giving us a good seed bed. And so as time went on, we just started playing around with some different ideas. The challenges that we had, they kind of made us think about what else we could do. And so when we switched to the oats, I had mentioned that it would lay down in the fall after it winter killed, and it would seal our ground. So we just thought, well, is there anything that we could do to try to make it so if it did lay down, we'd still have a good strip that we could work with. And that's when we started talking about doing these bio strips. Luckily, we got some funding from Soil and Water to do some CPS, a CPS program that kind of let us get into this a little bit more. But our whole idea behind these strips was just trying to give us a good, clean strip that we could plant into that would warm up a little quicker in the spring and work in the strip till situation. So we kind of came up with, I mean, we've seen people doing these bio strips in the past, and we thought, how could we make it work for us? I had never really done much with radishes, and a friend of mine said that he was putting radishes in his corn planter and then planting rows of radishes and then coming back in the spring and trying to plant over top of them rows, and was seeing some good results. And I really liked that idea. So we thought, well, what could we do? How could we make this work for us? And I really didn't like the idea of not having a cover between the rows. So I thought, well, we'll try doing something with a drill. So what we've been trying to do is we have a couple different things that we're doing. We have the oats and tillages, and then we have like a wheat and an oat strips that we work with. And to get the oats and radishes down, what we're doing, taking our grain drill and we're blocking off every 2 rows of the grain drill. They're on 7.5-inch spacings. So by blocking 2 off, leaving 2, blocking 2, we can get our cover crops on the 30-inch rows. And then we're taking our seeder on the back that we use for alfalfa, and we're putting the radishes in the seeder and putting the wheat or oats in the main hopper of the drill. And it kind of gives us alternating rows in it. And then when we're doing wheat, when we're doing a wheat and oat mix, our ultimate goal would be to have our drill have the main hopper be divided every 2 rows with 2 rows of wheat, 2 rows of oats all the way across the drill. We got to make the dividers, and I haven't got there yet. So what we've been doing in that situation, it's a little bit more costly, but we're broadcasting the oats, and then we're coming back in at a later time and drilling the strips of wheat into it. So that's what we're using right now. So if you can see here, you can see the oats kind of covering all of the ground, and then you can see the strips of wheat. Our goal with this was just to give us some cover in the fall all the way across the ground, and then having good clean strips that we can plant into in the spring. We had challenges trying to plant into wheat, and we didn't really care for it. And so this was just going to give us that green in between the rows that we're going to be planting into, and we still had a little bit of fall cover. And this is what we're shooting for in early December. And you really can't see the strips there, but then as you go through the winter, when you come into the spring, you can start to see them. They start to show up. I don't know what I've got going on my screen here. So this is our ultimate goal in the spring. We have these wheat strips. This is the wheat oat that we do in the fall. And we have a good clean strip that we can go through, build our zones, and then have green growing between them, and then we'll terminate the crop. Sometimes before, but a lot of times after we plant. And it really does work fairly well. We're usually putting the wheat down at about 1 bushel an acre, and the oats maybe 1.5 bushels. We had some challenges in this field. This was in 2020, the spring of 2020. This field didn't get much rain after this, and I felt as though that maybe the wheat sucked a little bit too much moisture out of this ground, and it just didn't yield as good as we had hoped. But other situations, it's done really, really well. And this is our oat and radish strips. Our goal with this was to remove some of the compaction from harvest and from the manure applications. It gives us a nice early planting window because everything is winter kills for us. And so those were the two of the main things that we really liked. And the radishes really do seem to do a good job of recycling some of the nutrients that we're putting down with the manure. And so in these situations, we may come in and put the manure down, and then we'll no-till drill these radishes into the crop. And I believe this one was after pea crop. We'll do this after sweet corn, and we'll maybe do it after snap beans. And we'll do this from end of July through near the end of August is kind of what we'll be doing these. And I just got some pictures. This is a picture of a field, and if you can see, the one problem that I have is we have some weed escapes when we're no-tilling into these. You're not knocking the weeds out, and when we do broadcast, it seems like that light tillage pass that we do does knock the weeds back. So this is one of the challenges that we do have. And then this. So I got to go back one slide, I think. 2 slides. So this is what our goal is. This was what it looked like in mid-January. So the oats have died off. It doesn't really give you a good picture. A lot of times the radishes will be, 3-4 inches across, sticking up out of the ground. So this doesn't show the radishes as well as what I'd like to see them, but they are big and they do a really nice job of breaking up the ground. And this next photo is what we're shooting for in the spring. We still have some mulch between the rows. I'd like to see a little bit more mulch than that, but this is just the photos that I had, I guess. And so the results that we're trying for, this is a good photo that Kevin had taken that just shows what I'd like to see. But some of the results, Lorie was asking me, what are our organic matters doing? I'm having trouble tracking that. I would say that I think we're maintaining our organic matters, and I think we're improving in certain situations, but I've struggled with really coming up with a good way of measuring it year over year. Sometimes even just by switching labs, it seems like we get a different reading. So I'm really struggling with coming up with a good solid number saying that this is improving every year. But I know we're at least maintaining it. And then I really like the idea of being able to recycle the nutrients. We get a lot of dairy manure, and I always wanted to be able to have that cover crop suck up those nutrients and then recycle them back for us. And I really think that these are doing a great job for us. The strips do give us the ability to get out there planting a little earlier than if we were doing the full cover crop all the way across the field. Sometimes we had problems where it, like I say, sealed the ground, or we were waiting for the terminated crop to die off. I know there's a lot of people out there that are doing a lot of work planting green. We've been playing around with that. I think there's some real promise with that. I see something like John McCauley and Forrest Watson and Donnie Brenton, but doing a lot of work on planting green. Like I say, I'm a little reluctant to just jump into that. So this was just kind of our way of making it work for us and still having some green on some of the situations. So some of the challenges that we had with this was getting the correct rates. If we have a larger radish seed, we have a lot of trouble with going through the seeder on the drill. So we ended up having to open up the gates a little bit. And so if we can have a smaller seed up there, it works a lot better. But we had some mistakes. We were grinding some of the seeds, and by opening the gates up a little bit on the drill, it helped us out a lot. The timing of the different types. One of the challenges I thought we were going to have with the oat and wheat mix is I wanted the oats to get enough growth in the fall, and I didn't want the wheat to get too big. So I thought that was going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I think I can make that work, and that's where I want to start drilling them together instead of broadcasting one and then drilling the other. Cost can always be an issue. It's not terrible. I mean, I think our radishes are running around maybe $8 an acre for us. I think we're putting on 3 pounds. The oats, $4 to $5 an acre. So it's not terrible. You may have some extra burn down in the spring on some of these crops, but for the most part, I think the benefits outweigh the cost. I know there's always been a lot of talk about the radishes affecting the tile lines. We've been doing this for, I think it's 5 years now. I haven't had any issues yet. We probably will over time, but I hadn't had to dig up any tile, and I hadn't found any roots in them yet. One thing that we're really careful of is we try not to go into a field that had been tiled within the last 2 years. We want to make sure that the ground settles down a little bit so that them radishes just don't go straight down through those areas that have been disturbed and a little bit looser. And then what do we think we're going to try next? This picture here is just a picture. This is what we do. Some of our late cover crops, we'll just go out with an oat and wheat blend or an oat and rye blend, put it down at 1.5 bushels, 2 bushels to the acre. The oats will get a little bit of growth, and then the rye or the wheat has a little bit of growth, but in the spring they're thin enough that we can still build a strip into them and still have a decent seed bed to plant into. So I really like this, and this is what we're going to do more of for our later cover crops that are mainly into that late September timeframe. And that's been working good. And then another thing that we're going to try to do is in the oat radish mix, I want to have something that's going to be green in the spring. So I think we may try either that lowboy rye or that lowboy rye with something else that would give us a green. We could be green in the spring. So those are a couple things that we're working on. And as far as rates on some of these, sometimes we're finding out that lighter rates are working a lot better for us. It doesn't have to be a heavy mix. Even I think we're finding on some of the wheat covers, if you're below a bushel on these broadcasts, it still works. It still does a good job for us. And like I say, I'm just talking about things that work for us. This may not be something that works for everybody. We do have that window that gives us the ability to put some of these strips out a little bit early, so they work really well for us. But all I'd say is make sure you try some different things. And we've learned a lot of this just by trial and error. And like I say, it works for us, and we've had some good luck with them. I'm not sure if we're going to do any questions right now or what our plans were. I think Aaron had some things he was going to mention about what we're doing within the demo farm network. If Aaron wanted to
We are
go.
holding questions until after Aaron's presentation.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much all I had. If Aaron wanted to go ahead and go.
Thanks, Jay. I think, let's see, I got to figure out how to share my screen. Let's see, where is that at? Oh, here we go. Okay, let's see. Let me try this again. I don't know, is everyone, can you see the PowerPoint presentation? It doesn't, I can't. Can I go?
Yes,
Yes?
it seems to be in edit mode at the moment.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm back. I'm Aaron, and I'm with the American Farmland Trust. I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to focus a little bit on the economics of soil health management and using some of the practices that have been brought up today. And I know it's at the end of the day, and so I'm going to try to just run through this fairly quickly. So for some of you who don't know, American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit. We're in several regions of the US. We're definitely in New York. And you've probably recognized us mostly from the No Farm, No Food bumper sticker. But we have three missions: protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and in general, the main idea is to keep farmers on the land. And I'm involved with the promoting sound farming practices piece. And one of our strategies to promote those practices is through this Genesee River Demonstration Farm Network. And the goal of the network is to learn that the main goal is really to use, to find practical approaches using real farms. So like Jay Swede is one of the farms that you'll see here in a second. And so learning from local farmers that have had some success. And using their lessons that they've learned to share their stories. We're also examining economic benefits and costs from their real life experiences. We also are getting information about their observed changes in soil quality, things that we can't measure directly. Like I said, they've had success. And so how did they do these things? So you just saw a really good presentation from Jay, some of his trials and tribulations and successes with that. And so we hope to highlight these different farms in the area so that farmers know they exist, and maybe other farmers could go ask them. They're there for a resource and mentorship, and they're also just trying different things and being innovative. And that does include working with Dave DeGoyer and his folks on his team, like Lorie and others, to, it's really is a team effort. We're also with Cooperative Extension. So this is just to show you, we do have 9 farms that we're working with currently. The ones that are circled are the ones that we have case studies for that I'll talk about in a second. But just to give you a general idea of the distribution of where the farms are. And I saw some familiar names on the list today, so I wanted to acknowledge them with their names, but I don't want to read through the list. But you can see Jay is in here, and there's others that are probably on this call. So we did try to get a variety of farms, but we also had to focus on farms that had resources to do these practices, that had really good records, and were willing to kind of put their business out in front of people. So it was somewhat of a limited list, but we do have all these farms, and we're very appreciative of their participation. So I want to talk a little bit about the case studies, because that's really the foundation of our network in terms of a communication tool to share information about farms, and especially the economic piece. And so this was originally part of a national effort where we have 9 case studies nationally, but 3 of them were from the Genesee River watershed. And so the goal was that people would actually read these. So we tried to make them short. They're geared towards farmers. And the front page, you can see there's a lot of pictures in here taken by Kevin Keenan. And so the front page is supposed to be really their background, why the information about the farm, why they started on their journey. And then you get to the back page, and it goes into the results of our analysis. So we did the economic analysis, and we also did some environmental modeling on greenhouse gas emissions and water quality. And so we talk a little bit more about the results there on the back, but you can see a lot of pictures. That table takes up quite a bit of space. So they're really brief, but they get across a lot of information. The corner piece of the case studies is the economic analysis. And what we did was a partial budget analysis. It's a really simple approach. We looked at, for example, on Jay's farm, he has several thousand acres, but we looked at one rotation within those acres. And you could see, so what you do with the partial budget analysis is you look at just what has changed. A lot of the farming operation, even within a field, has a lot of similar costs. So you're just looking at what changed. And so perhaps you go from 3 passes to 1 pass on your tillage. There's going to be a change in your costs. And and so what you're looking for is on the one side of the table, you have reduced costs, and so you increase your income. And on the other side, there's things like, say, cover crop seed or planting cover crops that are going to decrease your income, and therefore, what you end up having is like this balance. It's like this weighted balance of this table, and we look at what overall is there an increase or a decrease with their changes directly from soil health management. So some of the results here, there's a lot of words on here, but what I want you to look at is for Jay's rotations, and you saw a little bit of what he's doing, but we focused on his strip till, cover crops, and nutrient management on his acres, which I think was 1,500 acres. I don't have that up here, but he was seeing an overall annual increase of $55 an acre, which was a 343% return on investment for his soil health management. We also looked at John McCauley, who's in Mount Morris area, and he went to no-till cover crops and also nutrient management. And he's a grain, corn, soybean, and wheat farmer, and he had an annual profit of $44 per acre, which was 135% return on investment. There was also environmental benefits, but because of time, I'm not going to go into detail on those. The third farm we looked at was the Hargo farm near Jay's in Pavilion, and this farm's interesting because it's an organic dairy, and so they have more limited tools in their tool belt. For example, they still do full tillage on their soybeans and corn, but they did reduce it for planting triticale and hay. And they started planting triticale as a double crop. So overall, despite having some limited tools and already doing some good things as an organic dairy in terms of rotations and that sort of thing, nutrient management, we still had them with an $11 per acre annual increase, and also some environmental benefits, an 18% return on investment. I just wanted to look in a little closer to show you where we are seeing the gains and the costs and the benefits on soil health management. So with Jay's farm, and this was true for almost every farm in the 9 case studies. It certainly was true for the ones that I worked with. Really there's a large savings from reduced tillage. So you can see that there's quite a bit of $23 per acre reduction. A lot of his decreased cost, over half, is from that alone. And then again, what we see is typical is that the cover crop costs are also, a significant cost to what he's doing. And that was true for the other farms. And so really a systems approach, though, is kind of a takeaway message that I get from this, is that some soil health practices are paying for others. And so, just doing no-till, doing no-till can help offset costs for cover crops, which also have tremendous benefits for soil health. You've seen a lot of these pictures already, all from Kevin Keenan, but so the ones on towards the right are Jay's farm, and he's doing the strip tilling there. He's talked a lot about that. To the left there, that's John McCauley's farm, and he is planting green. So you can see they're rolling down with the roller crimper there ahead of the planter, and that field is just staying that way, and then eventually that cover dies off and the cash crop grows up in between. But that provides a lot of benefits and then helps with soil health. And what we're guessing is it helps increase soil health at a faster rate than maybe some definitely than the conventionally farmed fields, but even compared to just cover cropping alone versus planting green. So speaking of that, another big piece of our demonstration farm network is we have field trials set up on all 9 farms, and we are going to evaluate and demonstrate the performance of various methods of planting green using a qualitative approach to assess multifunctionality and service interaction. So like I said, we have the 9 farms. We're looking at 6 cover crop treatments. We're looking at ecosystem services through indicators. I'll show you just in a second what those are. We've got 3 to 5 years, depending on the funding to do this. And what we're thinking is that later termination timing of the cover crop will provide greater multifunctionality than earlier termination. So that's basically the planting green part. You give that cover crop an extra 3 weeks of growth, you're going to have that much more biomass and be accumulating that, over time a lot quicker, and that would provide services. We're also going to be looking at mixtures within there, and if those provide greater multifunctionality than just planting a single cover crop. And we also think that functional diversity within mixtures will also enhance multifunctionality. So legumes, brassicas, different mixes there, will that make a difference? So yeah, somehow there's an ability to draw on the screen. That's not me, but that's okay. So this is just one example of the layout that we have. So we have 4 blocks with 3 replications, and then actually there's a sub rep in some of the fields. And I'm not going to read through all this either, but you can see we're looking at biomass in the fall and also at termination and at the cash crop planting, which is planting green. We're looking at moisture, temperature, nitrogen availability. We're taking the Cornell Comprehensive Assessment of Soil Health at the beginning and at the end, looking at economics and environmental pieces. And so the subplots there are basically terminating, are looking at different termination timings. So and that's it. We do, like I said, have a lot of people that we're working with, soil and water districts. We have the EPA funding a lot of this. NRCS also was the first funders. And so I appreciate all the help that we have. Western New York Crop Management is definitely a big part of this. We couldn't do it without them. And of course, the farmers participating. And there's my contact information. So with that, I think we're now ready for some questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Okay, first things first, before anybody goes logging out, if you have, if you're looking for pesticide credits before you log out, please remember to put your name and your license number either in the chat or send it straight to one of us, to me or Avery, because I can't guarantee we're going to get you your credits if you don't. Anyway, first question I had on this was, what dates were the cover crops test plots planted from the first presentation there?
They were planted August 31st, 2020, and we harvested it on October 13th, 2020.
Okay. The broadcasting mix, was that drilled or was that actually broadcast on that trial plot?
We were grateful to be able to use Jay's equipment, and he had a Landau drill that we used to do all of the cover cropping that we did.
All right. John Davies wanted to know why we didn't have winter wheat in the trial. He wonders if you considered it to be a poor choice.
Not necessarily. We had quite a list to start with. We, Rod, Joseph, and I compiled a dream list, and we had like over 30 varieties on there. And then between Dave DeGoyer, Rod, myself, and Joe, we all sat down in a meeting and we discussed which ones we really wanted to focus on. So within that time period, that got crossed off the list, unfortunately. But a lot of it was, there is a lot of information about the wheat out there, and there wasn't as much about the ones we discussed.
All right. And the only other question I had here, which Joe answered in chat, somebody asked about having found roots plugging their tile lines, and said they weren't able to identify whether it was their crop or their cover crop or whatnot, and was there a way to identify the roots. Joe actually answered this one in chat and said it could be hard to identify the root by species. Said you might be able to figure it out by family just based on radish hairs tend to be really fine, legumes tend to be a little thicker. But it's kind of hard to figure out what's what when if it's not still connected to the top growth. So if anybody else has any other questions, get them in chat. Because that's all I got that's been asked already.
Jason, I'd like to just follow up on the roots in the tile line. If that's of concern, it oftentimes could be managed by planting date of the cover crop and how long you allow that cover crop to grow. And then also I found that many times when there are issues, it's either because of shallow tile or tile that wasn't installed properly and contains dips. Wherever there's a dip, it will hold some water and the roots will go after that water.
Right. All right. Well, I guess if nobody else has any questions, thanks for doing this presentation, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.